Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week I do a archival GMing, where I talk about tips and tricks I've learned over my years of GMing. This week I'm talking about not necessarily an intuitive element of GMing. I'm talking about the scale of the stories you tell. Not every game has to be about epic, world-changing events. And that's sort of what I'm going to be talking about this week. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about when you go personal, when you go epic, and when you go somewhere in between. Scale is one of those more interesting elements in RPGs. Now, when I'm talking scale, I'm not talking about the size of various structures or such. What I'm talking about is the level of impact that the game has. Some people love running epic, world-shattering games. Like, take the hobbits to Mordor, to Mount Doom, where they will throw the ring into the fires where it was wrought, destroying it, destroying the Dark Lord's powers, and bringing beauty and hope to all of Middle-earth type games. Others prefer a smaller scale, like Shattering Game. We're in this one neighborhood, and we're fighting to get it the resources that it can be self-sufficient. Getting it matrix access, power grid setup, medical centers, etc., etc. To the absolute most personal level of, I'm dying. I don't know when I'm going to die, but I've got stuff to do before I die. I've got scores to settle, and there's a slim chance that I might be able to save myself if I go after these people. And so you focus on everyone supporting like one character, or maybe that character is the focal point of everything. And that's the thing. You're telling stories on a range. And a lot of people kind of miss the subtleties in that. So the question comes, how do you determine what scale is right for your game? Well, ultimately it depends on the game itself. If you are running, say, Cyberpunk, Cyberpunk Red, one of the rules given for telling a good story is to keep it personal. What that means is you're not going to have it be about, oh yeah, we're going to tear down Arasaka. It's going to be about your characters, the characters in the game, achieving some personal goals. Those goals probably aren't going to be, we're going to tear down all of Arasaka. They're probably going to be, we're going to take down this one corporate exec. And then that's the focus of your campaign. The PCs taking that personal revenge against that one exec. In a more traditional fantasy game, like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder, it could be the classic, your party's starting village was burned by some bad guys, and your focus is to deal with that particular raiding band. You might do other stuff along the way, but that raiding band is always going to be your party's actual focus, because that is their personal vendetta, their personal story. You know, let's look at the classic Conan the Barbarian movie, the original with Schwarzenegger. His whole thing against Thulsa Doom was personal. Yes, it ended up having epic consequences, but Conan's quest to kill Thulsa Doom was personal. Thulsa Doom killed his father. So, Conan sought revenge. Simple, pure, unadulterated, personal revenge. And personal stories are some of the more powerful, some of the more interesting, simply because the players, as their PCs, get personally invested in those stories. The personal stories matter to them because they are immediate things, not something distant and in the background. The next tier up are what I would call local impact. You know, great example of this is actually from a panned movie that was the final performance of a great actor. And I am saying Street Fighter, the movie, with Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile, and the late, great Raul Julia as M. Bison. This was a story that was about a regional conflict. Small area. The fictional nation of Shadaloo, trying to take over its area. And the heroes going in to deal with it. Now, this was a case of Bison was a threat, not on a direct personal level to any of the characters, but he was a threat to the region. And so the characters, who all had their own personal reasons, you're getting something I'm pointing out here, went after Bison. Again, for their own personal reasons. But the story itself was on a larger scale. It was on a regional effect scale. And that was kind of an important thing. You're not going to see that often, really. I mean, you might see something like affecting a city, maybe a country. But generally speaking, most stories don't focus on such a, small region. They tend to either go absolutely smaller, zero in on the PCs, or a neighborhood or something like that, like in Shadowrun, or they focus on the larger, grander scale. And, the larger, grander epic is the bread and butter of fantasy stories. Everybody wants to tell their own Lord of the Rings. And so many miss the subtleties in The Lord of the Rings. Because they look at how it tells this grand, epic story of the War of the Rings and the destruction of the One Ring and all this other stuff. And they miss that ultimately it was the story of Frodo and the weight of him and his friend Sam Gamgee, carrying that ring into Mordor and ultimately failing. Frodo did technically fail because he did not throw the ring in. Gollum accidentally saved the day. In fact, if you really look at the Lord of the Rings, it is the classic epic story that we all know and love, right? Except it's the story of each of the characters. Their trials, their tribulations, their rise to something better. Merry and Pippin, at the end, are not the Merry and Pippin from the beginning. Frodo and Sam aren't the Frodo and Sam from the beginning. The only characters who never change are Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn, really. But, the story of Boromir is a tragedy in the first book. Because it is his temptation by the ring that leads to him betraying, but then ultimately redeeming himself with regards to the hobbits. And again, it's a case of while the stakes of the story are huge, it's the personal narratives that made it such a long-lasting classic story. And this is where I think a lot of people really, really mess up with various RPG storytelling. They put the larger story as the major thing, and they don't make it more the backdrop to which the personal stories are being told. As a GM, you should be working with each and every one of your players to have their own personal story develop over the course of your campaign. Because ultimately, while you might be telling a great epic story about a war of the gods, you want the PCs, A, to shine, B, to matter, or feel like they matter, but C, you want the PC's place to be something that they will always remember. You don't want it to be them just kind of acting in the backdrop. You want them to be personally driving things forward. And that's kind of my view on scale. You have the overall story that's going to be either totally personal, it's going to be a regional effect, or it's going to be a grand epic. But in all cases, you want the story. You want the character stories to be the dominant elements. You want the characters' actions to matter, but you also want the characters to have their own unique stories that work into the grand tapestry of a story you're telling. So, that is this week's discussion. Next week, I'm going to be talking about a board game. The Captain is Dead. Now, this is, of course, the Kickstarter version. There are more recent published versions that have different elements to them. But I'm going to be talking only about the version as I got it from the Kickstarter. So the most basic version of The Captain is Dead. But that is this week's discussion. Until next week, just like you all remember to have fun and keep gaming.